I am going to be playing Halo in the flesh on the Xbox. On behalf of the whole Halo team, thanks a lot for coming, and welcome to Halo on the Xbox.
Welcome back everyone, and you're watching the fourth and final part of the video series where I take a look at the pre-release builds of Halo Combat Evolved. In this video, I'm going to show you gameplay that comes from many different sources, such as the GameStock show, Bungie FanFest, GameStar video specials, private events, E3, TV commercials, and a beta build. To kick things off, let's take a look at some of the gameplay that comes from the GameStar video special. Starting with the HUD, you'll notice that both the ammo counter and the player's health are that goldish yellow color, which carries over from the previous builds that we saw in my other videos, with the grenade icon and the shield bar being green. As the player moves around, you'll notice that the walking animation in first person isn't very fluent. On the assault rifle model itself, the ammo counter simply just displays XX. The clip also holds less ammo compared to the final version. If you look closely, you'll see that the gun uses a completely different reticle that also expands when pointed at an enemy. If you don't recognize it, this is an early version of what would become the Silent Cartographer map. You'll see that the hologram is very different than the final version. As the build got updated, we got a better look at it through the GameStock show, which included pictures and screenshots as well as some media coverage. Many of the character models look nearly complete at this point, with a few exceptions, with the Grunt being one of them. You'll see that the color of the Grunt's headgear matches their armor in the pre-release build. That isn't the case in the release build, along with the fact that the Grunt is also wearing leg armor. Oddly enough, this specific model of Grunt is in other screenshots that were released during GameStock, but is nowhere to be found in the gameplay released at the same event. Here's a shot of one of the Grunts from that gameplay, where you can clearly see his helmet doesn't match the color of his armor. Strangely enough, a Grunt model with a colored headpiece made its way into the manual that was packaged with the game. There were a few changes made to the assault rifle and the HUD in this build. The grenade icon and the shield bar had been recolored to blue, and the ammo counter on the assault rifle screen now displays 42. Though that counter is static and stays at 42 when being fired. I haven't been able to find any confirmation from Bungie themselves, but based on the gameplay we do have, it does look like you can control the rate of fire. And by that I mean, the farther you pull down the trigger on the controller, the faster the rate of fire the gun shoots. Just watch the ammo counter in the upper left hand corner while it's being fired. From what I can tell, it doesn't appear to be shooting at a set speed. Surprisingly, there's a first person animation for turning on the assault rifle's flashlight, which, for some reason, never made it to retail. At first I thought the melee animation for the assault rifle was completely cut from the game. As it turns out, it was actually repurposed for the shotgun's melee animation, while the assault rifle got a different animation. When it comes to the Warthog, the biggest visual difference that I can point out is in the windshield. It has sort of a bluish tint to it. When you compare it to the retail release, you can see that the blue tint was toned down. Here's some gameplay of the Warthog being driven around. You can see it's a very early version of the Silent Cartographer map. In fact, it's so early in development, you really don't see that many enemies on the map at this point. And this is likely due to the fact that this map sort of served as a test bed for Bungie. In Marcus Lehto's own words, the Silent Cartographer began as a test map. Essentially, the box everyone threw stuff in to examine lighting, visibility, objects, effects, and so on. That would explain why some screenshots and gameplay videos show enemies in one area, while others can show the same area without any enemies. Another example of this is the fact that you can find the Banshee in this level. Now by the time the game was finished, the Banshee was never in this level. This might just be another example of the map being used as a test bed. When you look at this version of the Banshee compared to the one that was released side by side, you start to notice a few differences. Just like we saw in an earlier build, the lights at the end of the wings don't light up while flying it, and the pilot is left more exposed in the pre-release version. Taking a closer look at the gameplay, it appears that the Banshee either opens and closes depending how close you are to the ground, or maybe even the pilot has control over the Banshee's cockpit. It's tough to say for sure if it's one way or the other, so I'll leave that one for you to decide. The Elite shields in this build have an interesting characteristic to them. As an Elite takes damage, you'll see the color of their shield change from green to yellow and then red. Here's green, then some yellow, and finally red. I was also able to find a screenshot of this characteristic in an article published by Next Gen magazine. The next build I want to take a look at comes from E3. To give you a better idea of the time frame, the game's only 6 months away from being released. Surprisingly, Master Chief's got a new coat of paint in this build. As you can see here, Bungie's added some blue coloring to his armor. And oddly enough, this blue coloring only shows up in the E3 build. Another reason I find this sort of odd is that all the depictions of Master Chief at the E3 event don't include the blue coloring. This even includes a life-size Master Chief that I can only assume was made specifically for this event. When it comes to the Marine design, nothing really jumps out at me in this build. From what I can tell, it looks like the designs that shipped with the game, which can also be said about the Elites, while the same applies for the Grunts as well. If you saw part 3 of this series, you would know that last time in development, we saw the Hunters with an orange rust-like substance on their shield. I'm not sure if that's still the case at this point in development, due to the quality of the video. But it does look like the explosion from the Hunter shots do blast you further back than they do in retail. The Jackals finally make an appearance, and the only thing that stands out regarding their design is their shield. The shield is both yellow and pink, until it gets shot, then it becomes more colorful. When it comes to the assault rifle, there's no noticeable changes, or at least when you compare it to the previous iteration. And then, there's the Magnum. The big difference here is when you have the weapon scoped in. This gameplay does look like I have it zoomed in, but I can assure you that I don't. This is just what it looks like when the player has the Magnum quote-unquote scoped. You can see it looks vastly different than the 2x scope that launched with the game. We'll see some more gameplay like this in the next iteration. And just for the sake of being thorough, here's what the frag grenade looks like. There's a couple of differences with the plasma pistol, the first being that the indicator on the back of the weapon appears to be more transparent, and the second being that the plasma shots are blue instead of green. It's been a while since we've seen the plasma rifle in action, and although we only get a quick glimpse here, we do see a few things. It appears to have an orange holographic design on the side of it that's absent from release, though it does appear to function just like it does at release as an automatic weapon. The plasma grenades, on the other hand, they explode green instead of blue. It also glows when you throw it, just before it explodes. The portable shields in this build have a vertical stripe pattern to them, while the base of the shield has a moving animation. And while I'm on the topic of shields, the Elite's energy shield is now a spherical shape, which also has a stripe pattern. And one last shield fact I'm going to throw out at you is that in this point in development, when you kill a Jackal, their shield stays deployed. There's not much to say about the Warthog at this point. It still has that blue window tint. And taking a quick look at the Pelican, there's no real big differences that are jumping out at me. There's a few items of interest in this build I want to point out. The first being this object on the ground. I haven't been able to identify exactly what it is, but if I had to take a random guess, it may be an early version of the needler ammo that you can find on the ground. But that's just my personal speculation. I don't know for sure. There's a short segment of gameplay that I don't really recognize the map. It might just be an early version of the level Halo, but I figured I'd point it out anyway. There's some off-screen multiplayer captured during this time, where you can see the score gets displayed above the player's reticle. Here you can see it says your ally scored 2-1. The HUD is looking a lot like the release version, with elements like the ammo counter, shield bar, and health all being blue. If you see this part here, you'll notice it's much harder to splatter a player in a Warthog. We get a glimpse of the early version of the camo being used, and it appears that the power-up is using what would become the overshield model instead of the triangular camo model. The one thing of interest I did find while doing my research is a clear shot of the controls for this build. What's interesting about these controls is that there's a dedicated button for using power-ups. My best guess is they may have intended you to pick up the power-up and then be able to use it whenever you like at the push of a button, or at least that's how I interpret this. And I know this isn't the best image, but it's what we got to work with. And you can see there's a few differences from Blood Gulch then compared to the one that got released. From what I can make out from videos and pictures from the event, is it doesn't appear that the bases have teleporters on top of them. We also get a really quick glimpse of the post-game Carnage report, which is looking pretty bare bones at this point. The next build I want to take a look at was shown off at private events. We see the level Silent Cartographer and Halo Plate. All the gameplay was captured off-screen, while we do have some screenshots that were released by the media. As far as character designs go, everything's looking like its final release at this point. Chief even dropped the blue coloring in his armor, and is back to having all green armor. It's tough to say judging on the gameplay, but it does look like the explosion radius of the hunter shots has been toned down since we last saw it. The only thing that looks out of place is the jackal shields. They definitely look a lot closer to their final designs, but the transparency in their shields a little off. The assault rifle's taken another jump in design. The model still differs from the release version, with the compass being displayed by a letter and the bullet icon being vertical. The motion tracker in this build displays allies as blue, enemies as yellow, and your own movements as green. And as the dots move across the sensor, they give off this kind of smear effect. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, here's some additional gameplay of the Magnum being scoped. As you can see, it still functions like that previous build we took a look at. It looks like the zooming animation kind of zooms in, pauses for a brief moment, then zooms in again. The indicator on the back of the plasma pistol has been updated. It's now green, where in release it'll be blue. And just like that older build we took a look at, it still shoots blue plasma. The odd thing about this gun is not only is it shooting fully automatic, but it's also got a faster rate of fire than the plasma rifle.
Oh, cool.
The visuals on the plasma rifle have also been tweaked. The indicator on the side of the weapon, which used to be orange, has been changed to green. It also now has a visible plasma effect on the front of it. Now the way this gun functions is pretty interesting. It acts a lot like the plasma pistol from the release version of the game. It can be both shot in rapid succession or charged up and then fired.
There they go. Oh, I'll fire.
Now check out the Needler's rate of fire. This thing shoots fast. Here's what the Needler looks like when it's on the ground. See how it kind of glows? It doesn't do that in the final release. It also appears that the Needler is a little buggy at this point. In this bit of gameplay here, the first person model for the Needler disappears, but it still appears to function regardless. The plasma grenades in this particular build still have that short fuse and green explosion. And if you look really closely, you can see what looks like a lightning effect right before the grenade explodes. The Warthog in this build, it's still got that blue tinted windshield. The doors to the Covenant dropships are always open in this build, where in release, they only open to let the enemies out, then they close back up. The voice acting in this build is also not complete. Take a listen.
Two enemy dropships coming in fast. Watch your tails.
Where? I don't see them. Are you sure they spotted us?
Affirmative. Get off the beach.
And here's another example, this time pre-release and then the final release.
No time, Marine. Go, go, go. Touchdown. Hit it, Marine. Go, go, go.
When you get dropped off at the Pelican at the beginning of Silent Cartographer, there's a prompt to press X to enter the passenger left front seat of the Pelican. And although this is a glitch that got fixed before retail release, there's still instances in the retail release where you get a very similar prompt, but just reworded. The prompt to enter a Pelican in retail reads, press X to enter side seat of Pelican. It's a small change, but I figured I'd point it out anyways. Another change to the Silent Cartographer that caught my eye is that it used to have a parked Wraith near the beginning of the mission. A slightly smaller detail is that Foehammer appears to drop the Warthog off further away from the water. This particular build that they brought to the event doesn't appear to have multiplayer. The menu's background also appears to be just a static planet instead of the rotating ring. When they select New Campaign, they have two missions unlocked. The first one appears to read Manufacturing Facility, while I can't quite make out the second one. It looks like something Quarantine. Neither the picture or level names match any from the game's release. The icon used for level unavailable also got a redesign. We also get a look at the pause screen. For the most part, it's the same thing, just reworded, with the exception of the release version having mission objectives, while this build has a settings option and a user guide. The next build we're going to take a look at comes from another GameStar video special. This build appears to be very similar to the previous build, showcasing gameplay from both the Silent Cartographer and the level Halo. Even though it doesn't make it into the final game, the assault rifle's flashlight animation is still present in this build. One thing I didn't observe in the previous build that's in this build is when you shoot a Jackal's shield, it does the same thing that Elite shields would do, where it will change from green to yellow and then red. But this appears only when you shoot the Jackal's shield, not the Jackal itself. The Elites also retain that color changing shield effect in this build as well. Looks like the enemy placement's also being tweaked on this level, since there's no sign of the Banshee at the beginning of the level. You'll see that the dropship's doors still stay open, and it never fires its gun at you, so I don't think Bungie had that working yet. And lastly, judging by this little bit of gameplay, it doesn't look like the Covenant dropship shows up on the motion tracker. The only media we have in the next build comes in the form of screenshots. These screenshots come from a preview issue of the official Xbox magazine, where they got a chance to play an early version of Halo. Let's take a look at the weapons in this build. When you compare the shotgun to its release version, you start to spot a few differences. Instead of having blue iron sights, it has red. The spot where the flashlight should be is just a black texture. It also appears to be lacking some detail that the finished version has. Now we don't have the best angle on the sniper rifle, but something's definitely different with the scope. And even in first person, when you have it scoped, it has a very different design. And if you can't see it in the screenshot, it shows a 5x multiplier scope, whereas in the release version, you get the option to choose between 2x and 10x magnification. And at this point, it still looks like the needles on a needler emit light. Here's the release model, just for comparison's sake. Unfortunately, this is the only version of this picture I can find of the rocket launcher. It looks like it still has some of that red coloring to it, just like back when we saw it in the second video of this series. We also get a few screenshots of the flamethrower, which would be cut for the original Xbox's release, brought back for the PC release, and as well as being on the Master Chief Collection. The gameplay I got from this build comes straight from a TV ad for the game. The enemies in this build have different voices than what they would have in the final game. We'll hear more examples of what they sound like in the next build. The first person view of looking through the sniper scope has been updated in this build, and now matches the release design. And another piece of weapon related information, the needles on Needler no longer emit light. There's two things that caught my eye when it comes to driving the Warthog in this build. The first of which is the passenger UI seems to be misaligned. Here's a screenshot of what it should look like. And the other is that the Scorpion's crosshair is present. And speaking of the Scorpion, the word ready can be found on the Scorpion's reticle when it's ready to be fired. Whereas in retail, there's 4 dots under the reticle that fill up and then disappear when the Scorpion's ready to be fired. We still see things like the Banshee's wings not lighting up and the dropship doors staying open. And at the very end of the trailer, it shows the box art for the game with a T rating instead of an M. The next build I want to take a look at is a beta build of the game. But first, a special thank you to Masters1337 for allowing me to use this footage for my video. This build's only a few months away from the game's release, which leaves just enough time to polish a few things up. A lot of the character models look like the final product, so I'll only point out the differences that I was able to spot. Now, you could debate this one, but to me it looks like the Cortana model has a different color to it. The gameplay of this build is captured off screen, which is definitely playing a role in how colors appear in this gameplay. So I'll let you be the judge if that's the case or not. Captain Key's model, on the other hand, isn't the final model. If you look at the middle of his uniform, you'll see there's a different design. There's also a lack of shoulder padding that goes down his arm that's in the release build. Also, check out the differences between the pre-release build and the release build of this cutscene.
Don't keep it loaded, son. You'll have to find ammo as you go.
Not only is there some missing dialogue from the pre-release, Keyes also keeps the pipe in his mouth when he hands you the pistol. Now audibly, the elites are different. They actually speak English in this build. Here's a few clips of them talking.
Enemy sighted.
And by the sounds of things, the hunters have the same exact voice and lines as well, which means it was most likely an intentional placeholder.
Now this is going to make my day. Die. Friendly fire, friendly fire. Show me what you got.
And while we're on the subject of hunters, it looks like the knockback from their melee attacks is much farther than the knockback in Release. And if we take a look at both grunts and jackals, they both appear to be sharing the same high-pitched voice as well. The only thing that stood out to me, as far as the weapons go in this build, are the plasma grenades. It looks like they have a different glow right before they explode, but only when sticking an enemy. One item that has a different design are the health packs. In this build, they're more of a boxy shape with a tan color, whereas in the final build, they'd have a hexagon shape with a white color. And a small thing I just want to note real quick is that the select profile screen had a few things reworded before release, such as the joystick setup becoming controls, and current skill being changed to difficulty. While reviewing the gameplay footage, I noticed a few bugs, one of which was the enemy Banshee AI had a bad knack of getting stuck in different places. As it turns out, this bug almost cost the Banshee its appearance in the game. In an article published by the official UK Xbox magazine on July 2002, Bungie's Jamie Griesmer was asked, as deadline approached, what was the team working the hardest to finish? Which he responded that the last few months of development are mostly a blur. I seem to remember that the cinematics team were working night and day for almost a week to score and foley the cutscenes. I also remember being very relieved when the Banshee stopped crashing into trees near the very end of the project, because that meant we didn't have to cut them from the final build. It's almost embarrassing to admit how down to the wire we were. We were tweaking to the last minute, and luckily our excellent testing staff made sure we didn't let any big bugs slip past. Circling back to Griesmer's comment regarding the cutscenes, I'll show you a few examples of what the cutscenes looked like in this build, to give you an idea of what shape they were in, just a few months out from the game's release.
We're disengaged, going for minimum safe distance.
We're gonna make it, aren't we, sir? I don't want to die out here.
Look!
What is that thing, Lieutenant?
Hell if I know, but we're landing on it.
Look, the Autumn, she's been hit.
I knew it! The Autumn's accelerating. Keys is going in manual.
Heads up, everyone, this is it. We're entering the ring's atmosphere in 5.
You sure you wouldn't rather take a seat? If I still had fingers, they'd be crossed.
So as you can see, the audio and cinematics were still a work in progress. There's just a couple more bugs I want to touch on in this build. One of which happens when you're driving a Warthog and you swing the camera around. Chief will look in that direction regardless of where it's pointed, which causes his head to do a full 180, which I don't think it should be doing. And finally, there's a glitch on the silent cartographer, where Cortana's line keeps looping over and over again.
It looks like there is a path into the interior of the island. It looks like there is a path into the interior of the island. It looks like there is a path into the interior of the island. It looks like there is a...
And the last build I want to take a look at comes in the form of another commercial. If you look closely, there appears to be an elite with white armor. In the game's release, you never see a white armored elite alive. This bit of gameplay is on the level silent cartographer, and as you can see in the back, there's 2 Banshees, whereas you wouldn't find any Banshees on this level. The commercial also shows a bit of gameplay from Assault on the Control Room, where Pelicans start flying by a bridge with exploding parts. This particular scene never plays out in the game's release. Then finally, after years of development, the fateful day would arrive on November 15th, 2001, where the Xbox and Halo Combat Evolved were both simultaneously released. And there you have it, an in-depth look at the development builds of Halo Combat Evolved. If you enjoyed these videos, consider hitting that like button and subscribe to my channel for more content. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.